Welcome back to the Fuse Show, everybody. My name is Jim. I'm the co-founder of Xfusion.io and the co-host of the Fuse Show. I'm excited to be joined today by my guest, Jeff Fulkerson. Jeff is the director of technical services at Badu Networks, which is a company dedicated to improving the way the world connects. Jeff considers himself fluent in sales speak and techno-babble, and he uses that ability to bridge the gap between sales and engineering. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks for having me, Jim. Good to be here.
So let's get right into the most important thing that I can think of to talk to you about, and that is your hair and more generally like personal branding. So tell me a little bit more about Probro and the hair.
Sure. Well, right now it's a little bit tamed. I've got gel in it, so it's more controlled and small. My wife calls this fancy hair because you get the tight curls. Sometimes a little Superman curl appears in front, but when it doesn't have gel and it gets poofed out, it's pretty big. And I didn't actually know I had a fro until halfway through high school. My mom said I should grow out my hair, and I finally did. And it turned out to be a nice hair. Everybody seems to like it, and it makes me stand out.
That's awesome. We'll come back to this. I want to talk more about personal branding a little bit more extensively later, but let's go into Badu Network. I'd love to know a little bit more about what you all do and the audience that you serve.
Yeah, Badu Networks is a great company. We consider ourselves a software company at our core, and that's where we started, developing a solution to help eliminate jitter-induced throughput collapse. Now, that's a technical term, and I'm happy to start diving into that. But basically, when you're connected to the internet on Wi-Fi or 5G, 4G, whatever, sometimes there's lags, right? What you're doing is you're sending data back and forth. It's going across a network, could be going to another county, another state, to a server and back, and there's acknowledgments, packets, data packets flying back and forth all the time. All of that data has to be managed somehow, right? Maintaining, throughput connections. How much data can I send? Are you getting it? So one of the main protocols that's used on the internet today is called TCP, and it's been around for like 40 years at this point. But when it was designed to be a guaranteed transport. So it promises I will send every packet and they will all get there in the right order.
Okay.
So that's a good thing, right? And when you're talking about wired networks or smaller area networks that are more consistent, that's good. And it doesn't usually cause problems. It has some algorithms built into it that decide, okay, do I think things are congested right now? Did I lose some data? Like, I didn't get an acknowledgement back. I'm gonna resend this.
Okay. And
wait for you to say, yeah, I got it. But it's all timing based because it doesn't have visibility into the other end. It just says, here's some packets. I'm gonna wait till you tell me you got them. And so it's conservative in that sense. But that tended to work better when networks were more wired, more simple. Nowadays, they're so fragmented. There's wireless hops, there's virtual stacks. All of these things can introduce delays, whether artificial or however you describe it. There's delays in the packet timings. And what can happen is even if a packet didn't get lost, it just got delayed, the one sending the data might have to assume that, oh no, it got lost. I'm going to send more those packets again. And so the more that happens, every time it backs down. And so it sends less data and it waits longer.
I see.
And so if that happens too much, especially in a congested environment, everyone knows what happens, right? You can't load the web page anymore. It's
and
called
you leave.
throughput collapse.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you give up and you're sad.
Yeah.
If you're at a convention at a hotel, if you go there before it starts and run a speed test, you'll be like, wow, 100 megabits per second to my phone. Awesome. But then when you got 200 people in there, you can't load the conference website. And it's just because everybody's doing things at the same time. Packets are flying in both directions. And that's, at our core, the main problem that we're trying to solve.
Okay. Is this true also for example, I'm going to the SaaStr conference next week. It's outdoors in San Mateo at the fairgrounds. Would this be true for 5G towers for cell signals?
Absolutely. It's actually getting worse the faster the networks are. So there's different layers. If you're familiar with networking, there's it's called the OSI model.
Okay.
And there's different layers. There's a physical layer. There's the transport layer. There's the application layer up here at the top, which is what most people see.
Okay.
So TCP lives at the transport layer, and it's based on timings. But anything above that can have delays, and they might resolve their own delays.
Okay.
Right. So let's say in the wireless level, it sends a packet and it thinks it didn't get there. So it retransmits and then moves on. And then you get your response. So as far as the physical layer or the wireless layer is concerned, all's good. But then by the time TCP starts looking at things, it thinks, okay, we got a big problem here. That was a really big delay. I'm going to slow things down.
I see.
So anywhere along that stack, whether that's a buffer overflowing and dropping packets on the floor, or just a wireless network that's busy and taking longer to actually confirm sending of the packets, that all adds up, and TCP then reacts to that and slows itself down.
Okay. So what do you all do to fix that problem, or where do you all come into the picture?
So I mentioned that TCP has built into it some algorithms that make those decisions about when to send packets and how many.
Okay.
So we wrote our own set of algorithms to make those decisions for TCP. It's called a congestion control algorithm. Ours is called Warp TCP. If some people may have heard BBR from Google a few years back.
Okay.
They made their own. But ultimately, all we're doing is changing the decision making. We still speak TCP so that the devices on either end, they don't need special software. They can still talk to us if we're in the middle. We can still make things better. But what we're really good at is identifying in real time whether or not the congestion or delays that we're seeing is due to real congestion or actual loss, and acting appropriately. So that way we're not wasting bandwidth sending extra data unnecessarily.
Because sending it again would waste bandwidth then.
Right. And also the ramp up period, if we don't think it was a real timeout, then we'll ramp up faster than TCP would have otherwise if it was, a real timeout. And of course, if we think it's a real timeout, we'll do the same as well. But that's where we shine, is making that intelligent decision in real time.
Oh, this is fascinating. Now, give me your most primary use case example for a client.
Most primary. Well, it tends to be when there's a large amount of users on a network.
Okay.
So that could be a cell tower, for example. We've deployed our boxes in a cell tower. It could be a hotel conference.
Okay.
So if you got a whole bunch of people in a room, put our box behind those wireless access points, then we will manage that and make sure that everyone can actually use their phones during that conference.
Wow. So large organizations like Marriott, Hilton, organizations that host conferences all across the U.S. or provide the building and infrastructure to do that would be within your client profile.
Yeah. And let me give you one other example too, that is really important for some large enterprises that have a central office and then various regional branch offices. Oftentimes their employees in the branch offices have to VPN into the central office in order to connect to their applications, whether that's AutoCAD or whatever it is. And if those connections are bad, then their employee productivity is going down. So that's been a good use case for us as well, putting our box in that central location to then help everybody else connect, and get what they need. It's been really helpful.
Okay, that's interesting. So speak to SaaS founders. How might this be useful to SaaS founders?
Well, for a SaaS founder, your data and applications are running in the cloud. And so you'd want to put our software right in front of those servers in the cloud. We have a virtual deployment option, or it could be, if you're in a data center, you could have a physical server in front of it as well. But the basic idea is, for a SaaS application, typically it's more dynamic content that might not be cached, right? So those are the type of things you'd want to help accelerate or optimize. And so by putting us in front of it, we're going to take over that TCP connection and then manage it going to the client and get it there faster.
Okay.
Essentially, that's the shorthand.
So interesting. I love hosting this show because I learned about so many new problems that I didn't know exist. Like, I guess it's a solution I didn't know existed. I know about the congestion problem. I've experienced that a lot of times. I didn't know that there was a ready solution out there for this. That's fascinating to me. I'm curious, what is your day-to-day role at the company?
I've done a lot. I started with Badu at the beginning, so my role has shifted over time in terms of setting up systems and helping with fulfillment. But then I think a lot of what I've spent my time on is setting up our customers for success. So whether that's having calls with them and training their engineers on how to install and use our product. Okay. So I've done a lot of that in terms of documentation and video trainings and just hand-holding. I've gone out to customers, helped them get set up. So that's kind of how I view that part of my role.
Okay.
The other part is when I'm working with our team internally, because I have experience interacting with the customer, I'm making sure that our team knows what the customers need and are wanting. And you mentioned in my intro, I speak both sales and techno-babble. This is where that comes into play, because some of our dedicated sales guys, they start promising features on the roadmap, and it's happened in the past. Not now, but in the past, it's happened, and that becomes a problem if they say, "Oh yeah, we'll have that, by next month," and then our engineers look at it and it's like, "No, we've got to rewrite this whole thing. It's going to take 6 months." And so I can help translate that back and forth to let the sales guys understand what is possible or why it's not, and what they can offer to the customers to help satisfy the question that they're actually looking for. And then with the engineers, helping them prioritize what things are actually important versus what they think would be cool features to have. Because of course, when you're in technology, you love getting the cool little things in there.
Yeah, of course.
As a business, you have to make sure you're prioritizing.
Yeah. We're such big fans of under promising and over delivering. The opposite of that is just deadly. I mean, from a reputation perspective, and I know from a sales perspective, it's so easy or so tempting to want to promise something just so you can feel like you close the deal. But that's just playing the short game, so it's interesting to consider. Let's talk about Probro. I've got to know about Probro. Tell me more about it.
Sure. Well, I started that on the side a number of years back just because I've always liked making websites since high school. I'd done it for friends, family, and then I got some referrals, and so I did more of it. And so at a certain point, I decided I might as well make this more of a legitimate enterprise and kind of build it up a little bit, give it a name and whatnot. So I went with Probro because obviously I had the Fro. You'll have to go to my website to get the full picture of it on the About page, maybe.
Oh, it's on the About page.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I had it on the homepage for a while, but
Probroweb.com for anybody
that's right. Probroweb.com.
Oh, wow, that's legit.
So the idea is a Fro can make you stand out, right? It's unique. People notice it.
Sure.
And a good professional website is going to do the same thing for your business. It makes you stand out as that first impression, right? You want people to see that you are professional, you're here to stay, and you know what you're doing. So that's the connection.
That's great. Let's use this as a segue to talk more about personal branding. I'm curious what you would say to the founder of a quickly growing tech company that isn't as focused on personal branding as compared to just, marketing in general for the business. Would you would you argue that it's worth his or her while to focus on some level of personal branding?
I don't think there's a general answer to that. I almost say it depends on the type of business and who their customers are. Because if they're a B2B company, the personal branding might help with networking, but it might not help in terms of closing sales or getting prospects on the phone.
Yeah.
If you're doing something where it's more geared towards customers, end consumers, then having that personal brand image can be really helpful. And if you're really good at it, it can help in both cases. I mean, think about Elon Musk or somebody who's known everywhere.
Yeah.
Obviously, that just helps having that name and everybody know who you are and recognize you.
Sure.
But you have to balance that with your roles inside the company. And you don't want to be off just doing your own personal branding at the expense of your role inside the company. So I think there's a place for it, but it shouldn't be ahead of or getting in the way of what your company's primary focus is and the customers that they're serving.
That makes sense. It's kind of interesting to consider, and I know Elon Musk is kind of a mega character, but I feel like he's developed a personal brand almost accidentally, just by way of being a very eccentric character, So I'm curious how much of that is even intentional on his part versus just happened by way of what he's pursuing and the type of person he is.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm sure some of that was accidental because he's just living life out loud in a sense.
That's a good way to put it.
Publicly posting things on Twitter. And so then people are like, hey, this guy's interesting. I'll follow him.
Yeah. Smoking weed on Joe Rogan. Did you see that episode?
He does whatever he feels like, right?
Yeah.
It's not like he's trying to gain approval. He's just doing what he wants.
Honestly, that's what's so refreshing about him, I think, is that he just unashamedly is who he is and take it or leave it, And I realize that makes him somewhat of a polarizing character, but It's refreshing as well that he doesn't seem to pander to people.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting.
That works for him.
Yeah, totally. I want to transition a little bit into sales. Obviously, you have some experience there. I mean, let's start higher level. And what would you say are some of the ingredients that makes for a good salesperson?
There's different types of sales, as I mentioned, depending on who your end customer is.
Sure.
For Badu, we have a lot of B2B type sales. So a good salesperson for us is going to really understand the customer and their needs and be able to translate what our technology does and explain to them the benefits of why they need it and why, we are uniquely qualified to solve their problem.
Right.
And they are also not going to promise the roadmap, like we talked about. They have to sell what we have. That's a key important factor. And they have to be good at creating processes in terms of following up and even creating resources, whether that's, explainer one sheets, that you can give out to a customer, because there's different venues as well, right? If you're going to a trade show, you want to talk to people, but you also want to have something to give to them if you don't get a conversation, because sometimes there's so many people, or you're already talking to somebody else.
Sure.
So you want to hook them in whatever way you can. So someone that's good at coming up with those hooks and either putting them into email format or a landing page or a one pager, those are all going to serve that salesperson well going forward.
That makes sense. I had a really paradigm shifting conversation recently that I want to share with you and get your feedback. I talked to my uncle, and I haven't been in touch with him in a long time, and I kind of reconnected. He's in his early 60s and has been in like enterprise level sales in the software space for years. And I was under the assumption that sales was so connected to deepening relationships, and that was so incredibly important. And I still believe that it is, but it was interesting when I talked to my uncle Rusty, and he was sharing that relationships are still important, but he was sharing like in the early days. So it's interesting to hear the historical references, but like back in the 80s, 90s, et cetera, it was almost all relationship based. Go out to a nice dinner, et cetera. And the salesperson had all the information. But now there's been an equalization or even a shift towards the buyer where there's just enormous amounts of information available. And he said that what he's seeing work better now is a salesperson with technical savvy that can represent the product well and explain it very well. And of course, relationship is still part of that and important, but that it's arguably not the primary reason people say yes. Like nobody wants to work with an ass, right? Like, I mean, you got to be a decent human being to want to work with you, but more of the technical focus and just having product knowledge versus just simply building a relationship. Is that kind of what you're seeing as well, or something different?
Yes, and especially I would say in technical sales. So whether it's SaaS or something like ours, which is a technology product at its core, that's very important, because I think in the B2B space, if you have a technology product, it's going to be purchased based on understanding of that technology and the benefits it provides to the organization. As opposed to an end customer, you might be focused more on the personal benefits, and it might be more of an emotional sale that's justified with logic or, technical reasons. But when you're talking about a business sale that's very large in scope, you've got a lot of people looking at it. They're going over it in extreme detail. They're making sure that it makes sense, they understand it, and that it's going to work for them before they buy it. So on the technical side with businesses, yes, you absolutely have to know the technology side. And yes, the relationship helps, but that might get you in the door, but it's not going to close the sale.
I see. I'm curious what you would say to this. This is something that David, my co-founder, and I have been focusing on. And I know this is true for a lot of founders as well that are kind of moving upstream in their business. And we're working towards going after larger and larger clients for our business. So something like, we provide customer support agents. So maybe like they would need 10 agents, 20, or even 100 agents. And that's a very different sales process than what we started with, which was smaller SaaS businesses. So we are out of our league in terms of making connections with all of these decision makers at a larger organization where we're used to just basically one person or maybe a founder and a co-founder giving a yes versus multiple different people. So how do you and your sales team even start that process where you're, working on escalating up to the actual decision maker or the group of decision makers at a much larger organization?
Well, we have different people on the team that have deeper levels of knowledge. So as, one person opens the door to the next phase, and there's a meeting with these decision makers, we will bring in our people that are best suited to answer those questions for that particular customer.
Okay.
And we see this a lot with when we're talking to carriers. They're so large and their sales process is so long, multiple years sometimes, where they'll talk to us and then they'll test us in their lab, and then we'll talk to budget people, and then it goes to other people higher up, and you're trying to convince people at every step of the way. But some of those meetings are extremely technical, diving into how is this going to work with these other protocols running on our network, and can we prioritize this and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Or is it the budget side of, does this make sense? ROI, can we install this here? Or is it going to last? What kind of warranty do you have? So it's just, having the people on our team to bring in at the appropriate times to answer all those questions along the way.
That makes sense. Do you find that once you win clients at that level, they're more sticky than smaller clients, so that churn is less?
I'd say yes, because they go through all that process to vet the product, and essentially they're setting up for a long-term commitment. I mean, it's not a marriage, but the idea is you're doing the background checks and dotting all the I's, crossing the T's. And then when you say, okay, go, you're signing up together. You're shaking hands. You're there to support each other at that point. So for us, we make sure we have our support team in place to not just be responsive and answer questions when they come up, but also reach out, say, okay, here's how we can get you started. Do we need to set up a call? Do we need to send somebody out to your location to help, depending on the scope of the project? So we definitely do all that to help get them set up and running to be successful. And yeah, I think once they commit to it, they're not going to just drop it the next day.
Sure. Well, at least you know that it would take a year and a half to 2 years or whatever to replace you.
Exactly.
Some level of comfort. I want to talk more about you as a person, and I'm curious what makes you tick, or what motivates you. What would you say is your big why? Why are you doing what you do?
I've always loved technology and entrepreneurship, and it just kind of comes naturally to me. So anything digital or online marketing, anything about companies growing and scaling and doing cool things in the world, especially with technology, that gets me excited. And so that's the type of stuff that I like to be a part of, and I can't really get away from, even if I wanted to.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm curious, a theme that I've been thinking a lot about lately is playing the long game, running the marathon as a founder, and breaking that down into kind of micro wins. And the concept specifically I've been dwelling on is this idea of feeling a sense of peace and contentment at the end of the day, because there's always so much to do, a never-ending list. And I'm curious how that is for you. How often when you get to the end of your day, do you feel a sense of peace and contentment with the work that you got done that day?
I think in my earlier years of my career, I probably felt that less, just because you're right. There are so many other things I could have done or still want to do. Even if I did good things that day, I might have been happy about those. But just knowing there's so many other things I want to do and can do is sometimes, draining in a sense. Like you kind of want to just keep working until it's all done, but it's never all done. Yeah. So I've learned over time to, break it down, be more focused on the priority of things and what's important now, what's going to have a longer impact. How can I do this thing well and set myself up for success tomorrow, rather than killing myself, burning myself out to check off all these boxes now, as opposed to making sure every day I'm just putting another brick in the wall.
Right. Do you have a process that you can speak to that you follow in general on a daily basis? Kind of a day in the life of Jeff?
I use my calendar a lot. So I block time for specific things. So whether that's sales and marketing, it says SAM time, yes, sales and marketing in my calendar, or even blocking things like lunch, or specific Probro client work, or follow up with this customer. I get it all in my calendar, because then it's out of my head. And then it doesn't weigh me down. I'm not distracted when I'm focused on other tasks. I can be creative. I can be more intentional with whatever I'm doing. And then when the calendar says, oh, you've got this thing coming up, okay, then I can switch my focus to that. So that's been big for me. Making list sometimes of important things. I use a whiteboard. I'll get it all on there. Kind of the same idea. If I get it down where I can look at it and organize it and work my way through it, that's really helpful for me.
Do you find that you're generally pretty disciplined to follow that schedule?
Yeah, I'd say so. And that's served me well over the years. Obviously, I'm not perfect at it,
Sure.
But just having that written down helps a lot. It allows me to be more disciplined because I've got it written out.
Will you literally flip into like do not disturb mode on Slack, et cetera, when you're in sort of go into this deeper mode of focus to work on those things?
Yeah, Skype and Slack notifications really can be a productivity killer. People are well-meaning, right? Just talking about stuff or asking questions, but sometimes you need to just turn it off, focus, get your task done, and then check the messages later.
Yeah.
So I definitely do that.
Yeah. I'm curious, if you were to be reset to zero right now, you had the same knowledge that you have, but didn't have any sort of connections, and you needed to start fresh, would you go in a similar direction, or imagine, what would you do?
That's a good question. I would probably be tempted to start my own thing, but if I can take what I've learned and try something that I think might work, I would look at buying an existing business rather than starting from scratch.
Okay, why?
Simply because starting a business is hard. There's a lot of tedious work that goes into it, like
yes.
Late nights, long hours, things you don't think of that, trying to find the right people to hire, writing out your SOPs, like this all takes time and effort. And if it's a product or service that you love and you're passionate about, great, obviously go for it. But if we're talking about a shorter path from 0 to 100 or wherever you want to be, taking someone else who already did a lot of that heavy lifting and picking it up from there and then helping them with the marketing or expanding their scope.
Yeah.
That seems like a much more interesting way to go. And so I might try that if I had to start from 0.
I'm so with you on that. I wanted to push back a little bit, just for fun, but I am totally with you. In my past experience, I led operations for a private equity firm that bought SaaS assets. And so many times I saw that founders would grow a business to a certain level, and they just weren't able to go further than that based on their skill set or their disinterest in hiring people or whatever that is. So much like a home can be purchased and renovated and then sold again, the same thing is true in business in general, and especially in SaaS. And I've seen a lot of people be very, very successful with exactly that idea. And whether they resell it or hold it for a long period of time, when you have experience in different areas that is different from the founder of that business, there's a lot that you can go in and do to improve that business. And I personally think it's easier to go from, like 1 to N than 0 to 1. And I think a lot of founders or would-be founders underestimate just how much work is involved to go from 0 to 1. It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
Would you stay in the SaaS world?
Yeah, I'd probably stay in something related to technology because that's where my interests have always been. Anything related to computers. I mean, I've been building computers in high school, making websites. So I majored in computer science, programming. So that's my world. Yeah.
I know I give you a theoretical, but is this actually on your roadmap where you're sort of planning on pulling the trigger on this idea at some point in the future?
It's not on the roadmap, but I would say that if I grew Probro to a certain size, then I would definitely start looking at that. Yeah.
I think that could be really interesting. I'm curious if there's another theme that I've been thinking a lot about is this idea of, I guess you could call it maybe sunk cost fallacy, or the meme that I think, I don't know if you've seen this one, but this little guy is tunneling down and he's burrowing down and he's looking for the diamonds, and he comes up right to the edge, and just on the other side of a thin wall of dirt are all the diamonds, and he stops and turns around. And there's this idea in the startup world. It's like, well, do I just continue a little bit longer? Am I right on the edge of explosive growth, or do I stop and go a different direction? It's like, I'm curious how you think of that type of decision.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because in the media and everything, we see all the stories of those startups that did, work for 5-10 years and then overnight became a huge, sensation. And so everyone wants to be that next unicorn or next Uber or whatever it is. And they even describe themselves that way, like, oh, we're the Uber of, food or trains or whatever. And I think you have to be careful with that mentality to make sure that you're not so tunnel visioned on what you're creating, and making sure that you actually have a plan for getting to that level.
Yeah.
Because it's not just a luck thing. I mean, sure, it could happen, but you need to be prepared for it. You need to be taking steps in that direction, not just creating something you think is cool, but taking steps on the business side also to make those connections, relationships with other companies, setting yourself up for success so that when the opportunity comes, you're ready.
Yeah.
So that's what I'd say.
One of my biggest fears, and I have several of them, but in the world of business, would be the Blockbuster scenario, right? Like, why did Blockbuster not pivot to do streaming like Netflix, And what's funny is Blockbuster had an opportunity to buy Netflix and basically just snub their nose at them. It's like, that's concerning. Like, things change so quickly, and especially in the world of technology. What do you think is necessary for founders to do to keep a watchful eye on that? And I guess what I'm trying to get at, it's hard to tease this out in my mind, but it's like, I think it's easy to do this and to not take a second and just look at the big picture. It's like, is our ladder leaning up against the correct wall? Are we climbing the right tree in the first place, et cetera? How do you think of that as it relates to your businesses?
I think as a leader of a company, you have to be humble and open to change, because if you or your board are not, if you're just thinking, hey, we're great for building this cool thing. I mean, obviously it's good to build things and be proud of them, but you have to be aware that you can't always stay there, right? If I'm also trying to articulate this well, because I know for me over time, I've had to learn to look at myself and my shortcomings, things that are causing me to hold myself back that I wasn't even noticing, right? So that might be ways of thinking that are kind of undercutting my own path forward. And so once I recognize it, why am I not doing the things I know I should be doing and addressing it? Then I'm able to move forward and start seeing new opportunities that I didn't see before. So like with Blockbuster, it seems like a matter of not, they thought they were so big and untouchable that they didn't need to try something new. Or maybe they were just afraid of going into technology because they didn't understand it, rather than, hiring someone who does. Yeah. And so I think humility has a lot to play in that role.
That's well said. Well, I know we're coming up on time, Jeff. I want to end with this question. I'm curious, if you were to go back to your younger self, and you can pick the timeline, 10, 15 years, whatever, and give advice to the younger version of Jeff based on what you know now, what would you share with him?
I would tell him not to spend too much time trying to chase the right strategy or tactic, or I would say the right tactic or tool, and focus on a more long-term strategy that is sustainable, that you can follow consistently, rather than, doing that burnout cycle of go, soon I'll hit the jackpot, but intentionally building something of value that will last, rather than trying to have, the next home run today.
I see.
Right?
That's great. Well, Jeff, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been fun to chat with you. I know we could certainly go much longer. Lots more to talk about. So the website is Badu Networks. It's BADU networks.com. And then for Probro, it's Probro Web, literally FROBRO web.com. We'll post those on the landing page. And what's the best way for people to reach out if they're interested in either of the two organizations?
For Badu Networks, if you're just interested in learning more about our technology and how it works, you can go to badunetworks.com. We've got solutions broken out by the type of enterprise that you are, whether you're a small business, large business, carrier, or you can just go to badunetworks.com/resources and read about some of the case studies and our white papers that dive deeper into the technology there. And you'll find our contact info. You can just email info@badunetworks.com. So that's the Badu side. For Probro, FrobroWeb.com/contact. You'll see my info there. You can send me a message. I'm also on social media at FrobroWeb, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook.
Perfect. Great. Well, thanks again, Jeff. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jim. This was fun.
Cheers.